All right, so I'm going to be talking about another member request from Jay called Blowout from 1981. This one starred John Travolta, Nancy Allen, and John Lithgow, along with Dennis Franz, who plays Sipowicz in NYPD Blue. And this movie was one that I had never even heard of from the early 1980s. And I'm surprised because it was a good movie. And I thought the movie actually did a good job of having a subvert your expectations ending that made sense and kind of fit with the rest of the movie, and obviously story-wise made sense as well. So yeah, you guys are on a roll. I might have to give like a 2-for-1 for people who stay members for a year or something. I'm really surprised I haven't heard more about this movie because I feel like I'm decently familiar with older movies. I'm not sure how this one slipped under the radar, and my guess is going to be because of the ending. So let's just get into it. From here on, there'll be spoilers. The premise is a really simple one. John Travolta is an audio or sound engineer on like shitty horror movies. So the opening scene that you're seeing here, we get typical 80s. There's girls in their underwear, titties, sex, whatever. And then a girl gets killed in the shower. And the scream is horrible. So John Travolta's kind of laughing. His boss is frustrated and he's like, we need new sounds. I'm going to go find some girls that can scream. You go record the wind. So John Travolta's kind of laughing, but he's like, okay. And this recorded scream thing is a part of the movie throughout the whole movie because that's his job. And it actually ends up being significant for the ending in a way that I thought was pretty clever. And they use the TV a lot throughout the movie to kind of give exposition. So when John Travolta is watching TV, you're seeing this governor is running for election. He's favored to win in a landslide, kind of like the basic politics of the world for this story. So he goes outside with what I've just heard called a directional microphone. I'm not sure if there's a technical name for it. And he's just kind of getting the wind and picking up woods noises and frogs. There's a couple out there trying to hook up. And you'd think that a story with an audio engineer as the main character couldn't have an interesting background, or it wouldn't be at least. But they actually do a good job with it later. And I was pretty surprised. Overall, the movie is only an hour and 45 minutes. There's not really much fat to it. Although I will say, I think it could have been about maybe 5 to 10 minutes shorter. And it would have felt a lot tighter and a little bit more fast paced. Because there's a couple parts in the middle where it does feel like a bit of a lull. It's nowhere near what you're getting with today's movies where they're 2.5 hours and you're like, holy shit, they could have cut 45 minutes off. It feels like they could have used one more go through and kind of chop off just little bits or shortened scenes or whatever. Anyway, as he's recording, he hears what sounds like a blowout of a tire, and then a car swerves off the road into the river. So immediately he runs and jumps in, and there's a girl in the back seat, and he's able to save her, and there's a dead guy in the front seat. Now, you only see him for a brief glimpse, so I actually didn't realize it when I was watching, but what you find out when he gets to the hospital is that this was the governor. The girl does end up surviving, but she's pretty out of it, and this guy, representing the governor, is like, look, you can't tell anyone that you were here. I've already talked to the police. They're going to keep it quiet. He's already dead. There's nothing we can do for him. His family knowing that he died with his hand up some young girl's skirt is just going to be embarrassing and not really help anybody. This politician who's up for election is dead, and they're trying to keep it from being a scandal. And John Travolta, because he's an audio guy, was able to actually hear that there was a gunshot and then the tire. It wasn't just the tire blowout. So this is really the premise for the whole movie, is there's this conspiracy to take out this governor from other politicians, not get caught, and John Travolta happened to hear it. Really simple, I think pretty effective plot, and it's a good way to do a conspiracy story because throughout it, everyone's really smart. They make good decisions, or at least decisions that the characters would make. And then you get this kind of thing where he seems like a nut job and him and this girl are in danger, but no one really gives a shit because it's easy to just dismiss as a blown out tire. So he takes the girl Sally to a hotel. He just puts her to bed because she's sedated. And then he's kind of reliving the audio to make sure that what he thought he heard was correct. And it is. That someone shot the tire. It didn't just blow out. So now he's like, oh shit, what am I dealing with? John Lithgow plays like the enforcer hitman type in this movie. Obviously, he's always good. It's kind of funny seeing him young because this was 40 years ago or over 40 years ago at this point. But this is what I'm talking about when the movie, but this kind of scene is what I'm talking about when the movie makes good decisions. Is John Lithgow breaks into this place. You see him stick his fingers in the tire where the bullet holes were, and then he puts on a new tire that just looks blown out. So if anyone checks the tire, there's nothing suspicious. And it's crazy that we don't even get a basic level of storytelling like this, seemingly, in like anything now. I really wonder if movies would be better served today if they just pretend like we're in a more modern world, except there's no cell phones. Because that seems to be like a huge issue that every movie feels like it has to address. When I think it'd be perfectly fine to just write the movie in today's age, don't show anyone using a cell phone, and if they ever make a phone call or whatever, show them using a corded phone or whatever. Because it seems like there's so much technology now that a lot of the writers are consumed with like trying to write out a ton of it instead of just worrying about the story. Anyway, so Sally wakes up and Jack, or John Travolta, is explaining to her what happened, and she's essentially like, look, I'm going to leave town. And he doesn't know this yet, but they paid her to get out of there and just leave him alone and lay low. And then again, he's watching TV, because back then this was the only source of information, really. TV, newspapers, whatever. He sees this guy, Manny, who looks like a scumbag, and he plays a scumbag, on TV saying that he recorded the crash. So this guy's selling the video off to different news agencies. He's like, yeah, I just happened to be there. I was recording, testing out a new camera, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, we know later that's not true, but that's a pretty big plot point for him because he's like, my audio isn't going to be enough evidence for anything. No one's going to believe me. But with this guy's video, I can put them together and people will see the truth because there's a conspiracy afoot. Jack calls Sally and she's about to be on the train in 20 minutes. So he goes and he's like, can you at least have a drink with me for 10 minutes? Like, I want to talk to you. Because he's trying to explain to her what's going on and he needs her as a witness. Obviously, she was a big part of the scandal. That's why they're trying to get her to leave. And if it's a scandal, then obviously it makes it look more likely there's a cover-up than just a coincidence. And I really like this scene because she's like kind of your ditzy, essentially blonde hoe type, which you would never fucking get today. And he keeps her there long enough for her to miss her train, and she doesn't really figure it out until it's too late. But he's like, I want to get to know you better, blah, blah, blah. And he's kind of pushy. And it's so funny. Jay's been recommending these older movies to me. And I can't imagine seeing any of these relationship dynamics in any of the movies that from this era, where the guy's a little bit pushy and the woman's doing like a reluctant no, but she's obviously into them. Like, I feel like that whole thing is just gone now. It's like, oh, they met and they're both attractive, so they fuck. I actually do think this feels much more realistic. Of course, I also haven't dated in a long time, so what the fuck do I know? So Sally's like, fine, but then I need to know about you also. I don't know anything about you. And we find out that he went to school for audio stuff. He ended up going to the military. And then the real crux of his background is that he worked for a while helping catch undercover corrupt cops by putting wires on people. I don't know if this is how wires actually looked back then. I have no clue. But essentially, he fucks up, and this is why he ends up working on like shitty B horror movies. And the way that he fucks up is he puts this directly in this guy's skin who's wearing the wire around a mob guy and a corrupt cop for like a shakedown, and the guy starts sweating, and it causes the batteries to arc. Arcing is a real thing. I don't know if it would happen in this situation. I just don't know. Essentially what it is you have some source of electricity, it overloads, maybe it comes into contact with water, whatever, and it blows up, or it gets way too hot and burns out. For big equipment, it can explode. And then for this, he says he's burning a hole in the guy's side. So the guy's like, hey, get out, you need to piss. The mob guy thinks it's suspicious, follows him in there and hangs him with the wire. Pretty messed up, but a pretty good backstory if you're going to go with an audio engineer as your main character, I think. So John Lithgow knows about Sally and starts murdering random young women and leaving like a really distinct signature of the Liberty Bell stabbed in their chest. And he's like, look, I'm going to close I'm going to get rid of all the loose threads. So if I make a series of killings look like a crazy person, then Sally can just be one of them. And that takes care of that. So he's a total psycho. Obviously, really good John Lithgow character. If you want to see him be a psycho in something else, go watch Dexter, season 4. He's really good as the Trinity Killer. So we get a scene here with Manny and Sally. Manny's the guy that got the footage, and Sally obviously is the main chick. And we find out that essentially they run a racket where she puts herself in compromising positions with wealthy people, powerful people, mayors, whatever, just rich guys, and then they blackmail them to not release the footage. I think this movie did a pretty good job of having interesting characters by using sort of tropes of characters that traditionally aren't. Like, I like the idea of her being in on the racket and kind of feeling guilty about it. And this guy who's an audio engineer, he went through the military, the police. So he kind of has this fucked up background, even though he has a dorky job now. John Travolta takes the images that got published by the guy Manny, splices them together into a film, like a short clip, with his audio, and he tries to turn this into the police, and he does. And again, this is where like the clever stuff actually comes in, because this is a good thing for him to do. He's like, we need the original film, but this might be enough to get the cops interested and not just write it off as a blowout tire. And then the bad guys are like, hey, we can't have that. So they erase all his tapes and make him look like a conspiracy nut. I really like this little scene that we get here because John Travolta takes his little spliced tape thing to the cop and he's like, please just look at it. And the guy's like, look, I've got a lot of conspiracy guys trying to give me stuff and whatever. And he's also pissed off at him because he's like, you put away a lot of cops. And he's a cop. And John Travolta's like, all right, fine then. And he's like, no, give it to me. Just because I don't like you doesn't mean I'm not going to do my job. Like, he obviously doesn't like him, but he's just not automatically an evil, immoral piece of shit, which is just nice. And this little interaction also plays a big part into the dismissing him as a conspiracy theorist. So Jack's looking around and he finally tries to go and get the original tapes from the guy Manny or make an appointment with him or just meet him. And the cop's like, yeah, whatever. Like, I had a whole bunch of you guys who know him and blah, blah, blah. And this is where he finds out that they're in it together, blackmailing people. We get a conversation here with John Lithgow and some politician. And the politician's kind of pissed off at him because he's like, what are you doing? We just wanted to get pictures and get him out of the race. And John Lithgow, because he's crazy, is like, yeah, well, he's out of the race now. It's nice because even though it's a little bit of exposition, he kind of lays out, like, these are the loose threads that we need to cut off. So you know what he's done so far and then what he still needs to do for the cover-up to be complete. Just really nice and concise, lays out clear stakes. Again, something that it seems like a lot of shit now struggles with or tries to overly complicate or it makes no sense or whatever. It shows him working in his day job as a phone line guy. This is also really important to the plot later because he manipulates the lines and does stuff with the phones and records. So everything is tied together in a nice, tight way. So we get another little scene here just to remind you that Jack does have his actual job, but he's kind of been blowing it off and he's stressed out. And his boss is getting pissed off. And he has these girls in the booth that can't scream and it sounds like shit. So Josh Heupel's getting stressed out. Looks like Tennessee's getting ready for the Bama game. So John Travolta comes back to his place and realizes that someone has erased all of his tapes. So now he's like, well, fuck. Like, all my shit's gone. I have nothing. The cop thinks he's crazy. Everything's screwed. Again, just nice to see bad guys not be complete retards. And then the rest of the big part of the plot is this guy who's supposed to be a famous news anchor is like, look, I want to put you on the air with your evidence. And he's like, well, I only can tell you what I heard. I didn't see it. So then this guy's like, okay, well, why don't you get the girl? You and Sally come on and we'll blow this whole thing open for the nation on national television. And then he explains about the tapes, but then he's like, okay, maybe I can get the originals from that guy Manny. We get another little good short scene here with these two where Jack's like, look, I'm trying to protect us both. We need to work together, get the originals. He had saved copies of his audio in the vent, which we saw. And he's like, I want to go on the air and blow this whole thing open because once it's exposed, then we're both safe. If someone's trying to cover it up, we're in danger. So she decides to agree and play along with him. And he explains to her how that guy Manny has screwed her over and what a piece of crap he is. And she's like kind of in denial about it, but that doesn't last long. So her and Manny get into it and she kind of accepts that she's been a shitty person. And she kind of tried to justify it as like, well, I don't make any money and I can't type. Like, what the hell am I going to do? So that's how she sort of rationalizes it. And the guy Manny is like, oh, you know, it's not a big deal. And they kind of get into an argument and she hits him over the head with a bottle, steals the originals. We get a whole bunch of phone calls between Jack, Sally, and the news anchor. And John Lithgow is listening in on all of them. And he's trying to manipulate the situation to cover everything up. He keeps Jack's line busy. For those of you who don't know what that is, back in the day with corded house phones and telephone lines, if you called someone they were already on the phone, it would just make a beeping noise. You had to try again later. Obviously, that's probably not an issue now for you, but it used to be a thing. Him working the telephone lines comes into play again, and we've already seen it. Just nice, straightforward, smart decisions. So Sally comes over, and she's like, yeah, the news anchor called me, which was actually John Lithgow, because you were busy the whole day, or your line was busy the whole day. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was sitting right here waiting on him to call. So then he's like, this doesn't feel right. And he makes copies of his audio, but can't make copies of the video because he doesn't have enough time. So he's like, okay, you're going to go meet this guy, but I'm going to follow you with a wire just in case something happens. So these are the scenes of the movie that, while they were fine, could have been shorter. We just see John Lithgow killing a hooker at the train station. And this easily could have been cut down to like 2 minutes instead of, I don't know, 5-ish, which doesn't sound like a big difference, but when you do it a bunch, obviously it is. So John Lithgow is watching for them to pull up. He sees Jack and Sally together, and she's getting the wire. Jack's following her, And then once they get inside, John Lithgow is trying to get rid of her quickly. So there's definitely some convenient things that happen near the end of the movie. There's this big Liberty Day parade going on. John Lithgow walks her down to the end of the tunnel where he's going to strangle her. But then this random guy cleaning the sewer pops out. So anyway, they hop on the train. They go to this big parade thing. And Jack has lost him. So he's like, oh shit. And he has to run back to the car and then go try to find him in this massive crowd. So he's desperate to find him and just drives through the parade and into a building. And then he wakes up a couple hours later in the back of an ambulance. There's no one around him. Nothing preventing him from pursuing Sally. He still has his wire and all his equipment on him. That kind of shit happens here. Not a bad idea, just the logistics kind of make you wonder. So John Travolta wakes up just in the nick of time. John Lithgow gets the tapes, tosses him into the river, and Sally realizes what he is or who he is, that the cover-up is real and that he's going to kill her. So John Lithgow has her around the neck, but not in a super obvious way, and is able to sneak her away from this whole crowd during the fireworks up to this isolated rooftop. And she screams, and John Travolta is able to hear it somehow with all this shit going on. And he's able to force his way through this massive crowd and find her. All pretty convenient. But I think the way that it ends makes it kind of okay, because when he finally does get there, it's too late anyway. It doesn't matter. So even though there's a bunch of contrivances, she still dies as she should have. And this is a pretty melancholic or morbid ending or whatever you want to say, that he followed her, he gets there too late, and it's kind of just like screwed up. But she was also not a great person. And I thought it was a pretty good surprise ending, because normally, you know, he'd get there just in the nick of time, save the day, they'd end up together, huzzah. So I thought this was a pretty ballsy ending. And I really like the way that this was shot, where he's just looking at her dead body. Obviously, he's all disheveled from killing John Lithgow, and the fireworks are just lighting everything up around him and the flags waving. You've got this big parade, and in the middle of all that is this fucked up scene. So I thought that was a pretty cool decision and a pretty smart decision for the way to shoot it, but I did not expect it to end like this. Here's a better look at the shot that I was talking about. It's got like the soft piano music, and you can interpret it as kind of like sad or depressing, or in a happier ending, it'd be like the kind of relief celebratory music, which is also an interesting choice. Pretty neat use of cinematography there. And what really makes this ending kind of morbid is he obviously feels tremendous guilt. He fucked up again. He just keeps listening to the tape of her saying she wants to do stuff with him, and they're kind of casually talking, and then being murdered because he couldn't get to her in time. And in the end, he uses her scream in the movie. And I think there's a lot of ways you can interpret that. To me, it sort of seems like he's forcing himself to live with the guilt of what he did, or at least he's blaming himself for. You can see he's super sweaty and he's smoking a lot, but it can't be undone. We also got a little audio in here from the news about the death of the governor and that there's nothing to it really. So the conspiracy was covered up, she was lost, and he has to live with it. I think it's a pretty bold ending. It did surprise me because most movies won't do that, obviously. They always want the happy ending. They want you to feel good when you leave the theater. And maybe that's why I haven't heard of this movie before. But I think the idea of it being realistic and that message you can interpret in a lot of ways. I don't know what the politics of the creator are or the writer, but it seems like the message is that conspiracies do happen and people get fucked over and we're kind of helpless against it. And even when there's victims and evidence and blah, 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 it kind of doesn't matter. And there's also the idea that, you know, not everyone does develop and change and improve the results they get in life. So that's kind of what I took away from it. But yeah, another good recommendation. The member requests have all been really good so far. You guys are on a roll. As of now, the next member request I need to watch is Deadwood. And that one was an August/September request from Tyler. If you want to make your own requests, you can join the members below. If you've seen this movie, which doesn't seem likely, because I'd never even heard of it, let me know what you think. Or if you haven't seen it, I think it's worth a watch. Hour and 45 minutes, in and out, simple, good execution. So good job, Jay. Keep the oldies coming. And if you're still here, like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.